So here's a Chicago hardy fig between some roses. These are verbena, these purple flowers. Here's another fig, I believe an Olympia fig. They're both planted this year as really small plants. This was planted last year. This is a brown turkey fig. This bed is our lettuce bed, and it's planted from letting the lettuce from the prior growing season go to seed. So I've just done that. They went to seed, and you can see all these sprouts coming up. These are all different lettuce plants, Tatsui, Mizuna. They're Japanese greens. This is a mulberry that grew wild. I'm going to prune it to create shade so the lettuce grows next summer better. This bed gets pretty hot. There's some kale. That'll grow into the winter. So most of what you're going to see in here is a first-year food forest that I planted. I've been gardening in some of this site for 10 years, but this year I put in all these plants. Some of these plants were obviously root ball trees, bare root trees, but they were all planted within the last year. As we approach the entrance, this is a papaya tree. Obviously it won't grow fruit. We're in zone 6. These are wild blackberries with thorns. These are first year canes. Next year each one of these will have blackberries all over it. Growing over this arbor is Malabar spinach. This pepper plant to the right is a 1912 Roma. You can see those cool peppers. This camera's about 5 feet tall right now. Put in perspective. Growing up this trellis is a honeysuckle that blossoms orange in the fall. This is an okra. I think Hill Country Red. Growing up it is dill that goes to seed, and then again can drop those seeds. This is Mexican tarragon. Then we have a blue columbine, a marjoram. There's winter savory. There's even a cherry pepper plant growing in here. This purple plant is spiderwort. Have a dying cucumber growing up the vine. This giant vine growing is a Pennsylvania Dutch crookneck squash, and I've only planted about 4 of them, but you'll see it growing everywhere throughout the garden. It's unbelievable. This is spiderwort. This is our little greenhouse, and I seed this with old lettuce plants too that have gone to seed, and you can see all of the sprouts coming up. There's also some kale mixed in here. As it gets cold, I lay windows over this. These flowering plants are garlic chives, and there's a rosemary there. This is another papaya tree. I just grow them as a novelty using papaya seeds from some papaya that we ate. They grow well. There's beets down in here. You can see that are ready for harvesting actually. This little plant here is valerian root. This plant with these cool flowers is borage. And we have cantaloupes growing. This is that crookneck squash growing everywhere. On the ground there are ground cherries that grow these little pods. They fall off when they're ripe. They're delicious. This little pepper plant coming up. This is our smallest pepper in the garden. Underneath this Bartlett pear is orange mint. Then we have an alpine yellow strawberry. It's like a bunching strawberry. It's different. A basil plant that I've recently pruned, and it's starting to come back. And then a tomato and this crookneck squash again. Down here is a gooseberry, I think a Hinomaki yellow gooseberry. It's been crowded out all spring. As you can see, I'm chopping and dropping the basil to act as mulch. And that's the premise all around. There's so much biomass to cut down. This is another borage plant. You can see my tomatoes. They struggled early in the season, but they're bouncing back, and then they'll grow across these trellises. This is lemongrass that I brought in last spring and then separated it and planted it out a bunch of places. This is called a Mad Hatter pepper. You can see a caterpillar there on a fennel plant. That's fennel going to seed, so that'll replant itself. And what is already seeded in here is all garlic that grew in the spring. I let it all go to seed, so that'll come up naturally next year. In between these tomatoes are what's called a Thai dragon chili. It's a big plant. These tomatoes are called speckled Roman. They're like a San Marzano, but more disease resistant. You can see these are sun gold cherry tomatoes. These are early glow strawberries. That's a crookneck squash growing up these trellises, acting as shade for this new bed where you can see some spinach plants are starting to come up. This little tree is called moringa, the tree of life. It'll probably die over the winter here, but I have some seeds and it's cool. That's the end of a parsnip. Some more basil here. Another fennel plant. And then an okra. That's a red burgundy okra, a little bit different. That's a variety of San Marzano, a version of San Marzano. In these strawberries, this probably wasn't the best idea, but these are gooseberries, two other kinds of gooseberries. This is more Malabar spinach. Malabar spinach, you can eat the tips almost like and cook them like asparagus, or you can eat these leaves. They grow like a succulent. They're very moist. This is a bell pepper. See the peppers growing. This is the newest part of the food forest. I built this part over the summer, not last fall and in the spring. I have problems with squash vine borers, but I just plant a lot of squash plants so my plants stay ahead of them. More chop and drop here. You can see a cantaloupe growing. We have them planted all over. There's a tomato, and behind that tomato is actually a grapevine. It's a marquee grape. These are two blueberry plants. And then there's 4 more actually there. 3 on the mound and then 1 over there. These are melons growing up. These are string beans that just grew up naturally from last year. Those sunflowers are probably 14 feet tall. Next to them is okra. Everything you see on the ground here that's not a perennial like a blueberry or a tree that I point out was just seeds that I spread this year. So those okra and everything under them were just random seeds that I had from the last few years. Those okra are about 7 feet tall. Big squash. These are acorn squash. This is called a hori hori. They're the best. This is a rare fruit tree called a pawpaw tree. I have 2 of these. This is a Shenandoah or a Susquehanna. Not sure, actually. Tagged somewhere on the bottom. So you can see this tunnel here. I'm about to take that fence out in there, and what I'll show you in a couple minutes is a blackberry tunnel that I built. And I'm going to do this okra again next year too. It does make a cool tunnel. More crookneck squash growing around. Tomatoes, randomly. This is another pawpaw here. You can see the okra growing. Okra are awesome plants. If you have room, they're great. Again, the camera right now is at 6 feet high, to put this in perspective. This is a lima bean. What's cool about all this is that the roots around the base of all the plants are shaded, so the ground stays moist, and then I constantly chopping and dropping stuff and adding mulch, so the ground's constantly mulched. Echinacea. This is a Shinseki Asian pear. At its base is thyme, orange mint, celery leaf, a certain type of oregano down there. Verbena. This is more moringa. I'm gonna take inside and grow over the winter, so next year's tree is maybe 10 or 15 feet tall. These grow real fast. This is a jalapeno pepper growing next to a pluot tree. This is part half plum, half apricot. Mint at its base. Down here is sage, rosemary. Down there is lemon balm next to this verbena. Growing up this vine is both cucumbers and those green beans. Down in the back here is a goji berry, real small, but a goji berry. These are watermelon vines growing. This here is a currant, a black currant. See the green beans. This is a red currant that just died, but it hopefully won't be totally dead. This is another black currant. That's the blackberry tunnel from this year's vines, which next year will grow blackberries. I've already cut out the vines that fruited this year. So as I turn to my left, here's the greenhouse again. This is some type of pepper. This tomato didn't fare too well. Behind this is a variety of pepper called a cherblano, which is a half poblano, half cherry pepper that kind of just happened in my garden over the years. You can see more garlic chives coming up through here. At the base, more mint. This is a Santa Rosa plum. Again, all of this planted within the last year. More cherry tomatoes growing up a little vine there. This vine here is a pumpkin. Here's the other view of that tunnel. Garlic chives. Everyone should grow these. Look at all the butterflies. To my right is a sun gold nectarine. This is our asparagus patch as we walk through here. At its base, more beets. Over here is borage again. This is lovage. It's like a celery, but it's a perennial. Usually it's real big. It died back. It's another pepper behind it. More tomatoes. These are more lima beans that were covering this tomato, but it died. These are horseradish that have been devoured by squash bugs. This is wild purslane. We've been growing it over the years and it always comes back. This is a gala apple tree. You can see some of the branches I've trained. So it does exactly what I want it to do. Pepper plants at the base. a squash or cucumber coming through, or not cucumber, cantaloupe coming through. You can see beets ready to go down there. This is called yarrow. It's like a medicinal herb, but the all the pollinators love these little flowers, and the verbena, and obviously those chive flowers are fantastic. This is a red jalapeno pepper. This is a cherry tomato from last year that just came up randomly at the base of these 2 blueberries. So here's 2 more blueberry plants. Here's a cutting of a blueberry I took last year that didn't die, it made it. So verbena, these are marigolds here. A pepper plant in there. At the base of those peppers are dragon's tongue green beans. This plant through here, it's called a scented geranium. It smells so good. So marking the path here are 2 okra, hill country red again. They're about 5 feet tall. These are more dragon's tongue beans, but we also had cantaloupe that were growing down, but they've eventually died. These are leeks. This is a strawberry, maybe Albion. Most of them died, but a couple stayed. There's the blackberry tunnel from this angle. These are what I call Shelley's raspberries, because I got them from my sister-in-law Shelley's house. You can see how many there are, and there's so many. So these will give us berries this fall, and then if you don't cut these back, they'll bloom again in the spring, and then there'll be a whole new set of vines that come up and give us fresh berries in the fall. This is called a josta berry, which is a cross between a currant and a gooseberry. More beets, more leeks, jalapeno pepper. This is called a Auxilio thin-skinned red Italian bell. These are cayenne peppers that I use to make my crushed red pepper. I dry this particular pepper out. It's the only pepper I dry. These are more ground cherries here. And then this is our raspberry patch. Next year I won't have all these other plants in there, which I'll show you. But these were first year raspberries, and we're getting a ton of them, different varieties. So in front of me here is a tree. Can't really tell what it is, but this is either a Webster or a McDonald filbert. So it's a hazelnut tree. So it'll get real big. It's another hazelnut that got sort of chomped by some Japanese beetles, but you can see all the green growth coming out the base. Again, at the base of all these trees is more lettuce. In this case, Mizuna that's coming up from seeds from the spring. This is lemon basil. That'll all go to seed and come up again. Blue columbine, lamb's ears. Then along the fence here, more pepper plants. You have a crookneck squash growing in my fence, and then intermingled with that are more wild blackberries. This is called a Rain Tree Select Gumi berry. Another cherry pepper. Cherry pepper. This is called a fatale hot pepper. It's hotter than a habanero, quite hotter. Down here, this little guy is not doing too well. It's called a smoky service berry. This is a cool tree. Lima beans. So here's the raspberries. You can see them staked up. Okra plant in there. There's a pepper plant. Pepper plant. You can see the raspberries. To my left is a Honeycrisp apple with Shuksan strawberries at the base. More crookneck squash. This is what they look like. They'll get huge and hard like a butternut squash, but much bigger. This poor little tree here grew about 3 feet this year. This is a Rainier cherry, but the Japanese beetles loved it. But it's okay. More okra. That tree back there is a Lappin's cherry. You can see the trellis for the tomatoes. This tree here is one I'm really looking forward to, called an Autumn Brilliance serviceberry. Gets pretty big.